Hey guys, welcome to Star Wars Timeline. In today's podcast, I wanted to talk about the Force, how one fan, myself, interprets it based on the 9 main films that we got. We have the original trilogy, the prequels, and the sequels. This video will not be a deep dive PowerPoint presentation, kind of like encyclopedic look at it, right? We all can do this from vast array of novels that we have and comic books and Wikipedia and documentaries explaining in detail exactly what was intended or what was George's original plan. I want it to be a more of a conversational video of how each fan interprets it based on our worldview or the culture that you come from or a different part of the world that you live in, right? Our own interpretations will be slightly different, and I think that's the fun of it, right? Instead of just going to the source books and reading everything word for word and taking it at face value, I think the fun is in interpreting the ideas and making them more personal and relatable based on our life experiences and the stuff that we enjoy, the shows that we watch and the books that we read and so forth. Anyway, as I said, we're going to use the main 9 films, and let's start with the original trilogy. This is what I saw when I was a kid back in 1987 when my dad brought home the VHS tapes. And when I popped in the movies and started watching them with my family, obviously one of the first iconic scenes that we see is in episode 4 when Obi-Wan Kenobi saves Luke from Tusken Raiders. He brings him to his home, and he gives Luke, the young person, a general idea what the Force is. And pretty much from that point forward, we get as much as what Luke understands. There's this great power, great magic, and it lives in everything. But we don't go much beyond that. Obviously, we see a little bit of Luke's training with a visored helmet, and he deflects the 3 laser bolts. And I was thinking to myself, oh wow, the kid just got lucky, right? Despite Han Solo saying, he had luck, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, of course, the Jedi Master, says there's no such thing as luck for a Jedi Master. As a kid, that's what I interpreted it. I didn't feel like Luke was actually guided by the Force in that moment. I was like, okay, I guess the kid is advancing. He's learning a skill, maybe something that will connect him to this magic later on. And interestingly enough, in episode 4, we also indirectly delve more into the Force, although the bigger chunk of it is going to come later in episode 5. For example, one of the scenes that made the most impression on me when I was a kid was Obi-Wan Kenobi goes around the Death Star, and he's actually disabling the shield, and he's distracting the stormtroopers. And right there, I understood that he's doing something. Although, for me, for a 7-year-old, it was hard to register exactly what was going on, and it took years of rewatching those tapes to figure out what is happening. But obviously, we understood that Obi-Wan Kenobi is not just throwing something, and me as a kid just not seeing the object that he's throwing. No, he's doing something with his hand. He's doing some gestures, and he's able to avoid all of stormtroopers up until the point where he actually faces Vader. So once again, just looking at Alec Guinness's outfit, and I was a child looking at it, he gave me this idea that this guy is basically a space wizard, that he has some knowledge that the rest of us don't. And even his encounter with Vader, right? They explain to each other, hey, now I'm the master. And Obi-Wan Kenobi goes back, doubles down on his ideas. And he says, look, if you strike me down, I will become even more powerful. Obviously, at this point in the story, I, as a kid, did not understand what that potentially means. What does he mean he'll become even more powerful? He'll be dead. What's happening here? But once again, you were just struck with this awe of trying to understand what is happening. What is this Force? What does Obi-Wan Kenobi mean? And after he has that one look at Luke Skywalker and submits himself to the Force, his body disappears. Once again, to me as a child, it was a little bit confusing, but once again, there is this overpowering presence of something great. This is basically how I understood the Force in the beginning when I saw the original movie. Later on in the same episode, when Tarkin tells Darth Vader, he said, look, are you sure that you sense Kenobi? You felt his presence? You, my friend, are the last of your old religion. So to me, it was kind of cool because up until that point, obviously, we didn't know what the Sith are. All that we knew, there was this Jedi religion that understood the Force, and this dark, evil knight also was a practitioner of it. So me, when I was a kid, I didn't make any distinction, obviously, for the lack of terminology of the Sith. There weren't any Sith or Jedi. There weren't any cabals or different factions that stuck to different sides aspects of the Force. Basically, the Force was this one huge pool that anybody could draw from, right? And obviously, Obi-Wan Kenobi is a noble person. He does it for good and for selfless deeds. Whereas Vader was also a Jedi, a dark Jedi, twisted one who became evil, but he also is tapping from the same source, from the same pool, but he's using that same energy, those same feats and same abilities to do evil. It was quite fascinating, and once again, rewatching it over and over again throughout the years gives you a quite an interesting and distinct ideas about the Force from the prequel trilogy and also from the sequel trilogy. Obviously, we're going to go deeper into it. Finally, at the end of episode 4, when Luke Skywalker hears Kenobi's voice, obviously you understand as a child, like, okay, so Obi-Wan Kenobi is dead, but his spirit, right, his ghost is still reaching out to Luke. But what Luke is able to do, how he goes into the trench and he shoots through that compartment, right, and he sends the torpedoes down, he explodes the whole Death Star. There you understand that something is there amplifying Luke's abilities. And I love the fact that to this day, A New Hope is still my favorite Star Wars film because it's very, very subtle. It's like they give you a touch of what the Force does, but it doesn't go overboard. It doesn't go Dragon Ball Z to the level of, over 9,000. So it's quite interesting. But then when we go to Empire Strikes Back, this is where we get, I would say, the definitive version of what the Force is if we comprise all 9 films. Because Luke's journey to Dagobah, even before that point, right, when he's there in the snow of Hoth and he's dying and he sees a vision of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and once again you see like, whoa, now, okay, visually this was stunning. This was unlike anything I've seen before. Once again, upon my first watch as a kid, now you see these ghosts, these powerful beings. Like, what is that? Is this something that Luke just saw? Is that just fake? Is that not real? But then he imparts information to Luke, and he says, you're going to go to this location, this destination, and you will meet a great master. And obviously, because all of it happens, my interpretation was like, oh, that was not fake. Because for children, it's very hard to distinguish unless he specifically tells them, no, this is real and this is fake. This is taking place in a person's imagination, but this is actually happening. So to me, it took a while to digest all of it, but I understood like, okay, this is pretty real. So Obi-Wan Kenobi somehow went past death and he's able to reach out to Luke and talk to him. And now we're to Dagobah, right? And obviously we see the great training with Yoda, and he's this funny goblin-like creature. He pokes fun of Luke. He's too young. I'm not going to train him. He makes fun. He goes into his lunchbox, but then things turn around. He becomes serious, and he says it takes the most focused and dedicated mind, and you have to be very disciplined to learn what this stuff is, what this power is. And when he explains to Luke that the Force is everywhere, resides in rocks, and resides in you, and we're luminous beings, and we're all part of it. That, to me, to this day, resembles the main pillar. That everything else branches off from Episode 5 explanation. That's like the definitive explanation what the Force is, because you don't get too much of it, but you don't get too little. Yoda basically explains it's basically a spiritual component of it, and I think the closest parallel that I could draw is the Native American tribes or indigenous peoples around the world, right? They sense that this greater power, it's not necessarily personified as a person, as a male, as a god, as somebody who controls your destiny. Because nowhere in the original trilogy, to this day, I felt like the Force is something that influences your decision. No, you're still the master of your own destiny, but there's certain doors they have to walk through. There's certain things they have to understand about yourself, about your spiritual being, in order to pass that and become greater than you were before. That's what every hero must do in order to overcome the insurmountable odds and evil. He has to become greater than he already was. And that's what the Force is. And it's up to the person, like it was up to Luke Skywalker, to learn what this Force is, right? And I really liked how Luke had a vision in there of his friends And you never know to this day, like I'm looking at this, did actually Luke see Han being tortured, or did he perhaps see a scene which was much more horrible than actually what happens, and it actually forced his hand to say, like, no, I can't wait anymore. I'm going to go and save my friends. And when he actually goes there, things were pretty dire. Obviously, Han Solo is in carbonite and Leia has been taken away. But at the same time, there's still hope for everyone. I think what Luke saw in that vision of the future, which Yoda describes as very fluid, is something 10 times more horrible than actually happened. And because Luke is untrained and he is not focused enough, he says, that's it. This is what I saw. This is factual. I got to go and save my friends. And I really enjoyed that a lot because there's different interpretations and different degrees of where Force might go. And it all depends on the disciplined mind and the kind of place that Luke was intellectually and emotionally at that point in his life. And that's how he's able to use the Force. Obviously, we see as a result of The Empire Strikes Back, not very effectively because Vader defeats him, he cuts off his arm, and Luke is basically defeated in that film. Also, for a 7-year-old child like myself, the scene on Dagobah was also very interesting when Luke was trying to recover his X-Wing from the swamp. Because at one point, it felt like Luke is under physical stress. So I was wondering, is the Force actually affecting his body? He's not unable to focus on all that stress. But then I understood, no. That's what the movies does, is showing us he needs to raise his hand because we don't see the Force with our eyes. We just need to show that he's focusing, he's concentrating. And once again, Yoda reiterated to him that it's not about the size of the rock or the spaceship. It has to do with you. Something has to grow inside from you, which is a very Eastern kind of like Buddhist kind of a teaching, where basically you are the blooming lotus, right? And all the information, all the potential that you might possibly need in your life is already inside you. You just need to uncover it. And that's what that scene particularly represented to me. But then in episode 6, Return of the Jedi, there were a lot of interesting moments there where now the ideas of what the Force is, of what this magical power is, but also what a hero's journey and a hero's destiny is. And I found that they were kind of separate. That Luke needed to fulfill his destiny. He needed to confront his father, Darth Vader, just like Yoda instructed him, right? Because when Luke returns to Dagobah and Yoda tells him, look, I have already taught you everything that you need to know. Meaning that you already have all the training and Jedi skills. And when Luke says, so I am a Jedi now, and Yoda chuckles a little bit and he says, no, one more task remains. You must confront Vader. And what that represents to me is that he's basically saying you need to come to a full circle and understand who you are as a person. It basically spelled out for Luke that your spiritual and intellectual maturation is yet to complete. Because you need to go there, you need to see your father, and you need to see what the outcome will be, right? Because the future is not foretold. The future is not certain. It's always in motion. And obviously, that story could have gone separate different routes. That Vader was irredeemable and Luke had to strike him down. Or what we saw, actually, he was able to redeem a Darth Vader. And I also liked the conversation with Leia and the whole idea, the notion of Skywalker bloodline being strong in the Force. Because when Luke talks to Leia, nothing is required of her to be strong in the Force. And I don't think at that point in time, George Lucas intended the Force to be something that is genetically transferred, right? Because you have to have the midichlorians and they tell you the will of the Force. No, Luke tells Leia, look, my father has that power. I have it, and you have that power too. And he says it in real time. You have that power, and soon you will learn to control and understand it. So to me, it didn't mean, as a kid, that Skywalkers are somehow special. He's basically saying that, look, this power lives everywhere. It's around us. And it's something that I've learned to master. And if you focus and you dedicate yourself to this lifestyle, as I did, if you will focus on doing good, and then it's something that you could learn as well. There's a case to be made that Han or Lando Calrissian never talk about this Force in the same way. But at the same time, I don't know. It never felt to me that Skywalkers were different somehow, that they stood out, that their lineage, their bloodline is special somehow. I think what the movie signified is that both Luke and Vader were the ones who excelled in the Force because they were dedicated to it. And of course, Vader went the bad route and he became an evil person, while Luke chose to do good. And I also liked the Emperor's magic when we finally see the Emperor in his full swing and he's confronting Luke and he's using that lightning. To me, once again, as a kid, it was a very gratifying moment because it showed an aspect of the Force which we don't see a lot. Right? We see the Jedi jump real high or move real fast or levitate objects, but now we see a visual manifestation of what the Force does. Because if you're so evil as this Emperor is, then you could tap into that same pool and you can transfer it actually through your fingers. And to me, it looks like lightning, but I didn't see it as lightning as a kid. I saw that is actually Force coming out of his fingers and destroying Luke. And the miracle of Luke's sacrifice, what Luke does as a Jedi, is not defeating Vader, is not being strong with the lightsaber and, fencing his father and chopping his arm off and saying, no, Dad, I have to save you. What happens there with Luke Skywalker is that he makes a sacrifice. He throws away his lightsaber and he tells the Emperor, I will never become evil. I will never subdue to what you want me to be. I am a Jedi like my father before me. And this is the strongest moment for a Jedi person because Luke becomes the lightsaber. He becomes the Force. He says, you cannot defeat me because my heart is straight. I know what I must do. I must save my father and I must restore order in the galaxy. And it's that sacrifice which I think Yoda intended when he told Luke, you must confront Vader, right? Because that very tense moment, that the crushing point of one Force opposing the other, it brings out the most in Luke. And if it brought out the most evil, heinous kind of Force abilities in the Emperor and in Vader, in Luke, it brings the best out of him. It is actually the Force that it heals Vader's heart. And he sees that his son is dying in front of his eyes. And he takes the Emperor and he throws him, right? That is the ultimate Force ability. That is the ultimate Force power. Now let's move away from the original trilogy where I understood it was basically the Force is this magical ability, but it stands differently from your destiny because its destiny is something that you shape by yourself. You have to walk the walk of life and make all the necessary steps and take responsibility. From young Luke on Tatooine, he's like, there's nothing I can do about the Empire right now, to Luke who actualizes himself, who becomes in full force a Jedi through the actions that he does. And the Force is just a quiet pool that resides there somewhere in unfathomable reaches of the galaxy, or maybe in the fourth dimension or something like that, that a person is able to tap into and help guide his destiny. Now we move into prequel territory, and I remember watching them, in theaters from 1999 to 2005, and they gave me quite a different feel and taste of what the Force is. I'm not going to go too much into the expanded universe because obviously we're focusing on the films. So let's take a look what was done in the films there, and I have felt George basically went back to his idea, went back to the drawing board, and he said, well, okay, so 15 years ago, I made these original films. What else can I bring to the table? How else can I explore all of these concepts? Not only change up the type of hero that I want to do, but also explain the Force in slightly different way. And of course, we begin with the Phantom Menace, and a very, very important figure for understanding the Force is Qui-Gon Jinn, right? Because it's his faithful meeting with Anakin Skywalker, and he says, this child is special. There's something very, very special about him. He has this huge midichlorian count. He's the only human pod racer, and I got to take care of him. Maybe he will deliver us. He will bring something to the Jedi Order that was not there before. He is the key. So if in the original trilogy, I felt that the key was understanding what the Force is the key, and Luke Skywalker, it was on him to go out there, reach out for it, and learn the Force. Here, it's quite different. Now we see a child here who already possesses that immense power. He's the chosen one. He is the key to all of the Jedi problems. And he said, oh, maybe he will be the one who restores the Force. And of course, Qui-Gon Jinn explains to Anakin Skywalker, he says, look, there are these small, tiny, microscopic living things, midichlorians, and they also reside within all living beings, but they dictate the will of the Force to us, which is quite a different interpretation from what we see in the original trilogy. Now, the Force is almost an active participant. It's someone who guides the hero, and it spells out what he must do. And if he diverts from the path, the Force will either destroy you, or something terrible will happen to you. Anyway, the Force in this essence feels more like a patriarch, kind of like this godlike figure. I'm gonna cheat just a little bit, guys. I promise, just a tiny bit. In the Clone Wars series, right, we have this episodes that dealing with the father and the son and the daughter, the three personifications of the Force. It almost feels like what the Force is here in the prequels, like a more of an intelligent presence, so to speak, right? And it was fun when you see young Anakin standing before the council. All of them are struck with this young person, and Yoda is very cautious to accept him. He said, this kid, there's so much potential there, but he could possibly be not good for the Jedi Order. He could possibly spell destruction. He's too old. There's much anger in him, and Mace Windu says he will not be trained. But once again, Qui-Gon Jinn sees something in this child that he says, regardless of what the Council says, I do believe that he will bring forth the balance in the Force, and he takes up to train him. And later on in the trilogy, we once again see the manifestations of the Force when Yoda comes out in episode 2 and he duels Count Dooku. And we see awesome powers on display, right? Count Dooku's using the lightning, and Yoda using quite something different. He's able to pull and kind of like refract that force lightning and kind of, but not attack back. He's basically absorbing everything that Count Dooku is throwing at him, and he says, no, I'm not going to use it against you because the Jedi must protect himself. That was an interesting visual cue for me. I was like, okay, cool. I like what is happening with the Force visually. And obviously, when Yoda fights Palpatine later on, we see once again awesome display of powers, right? We see Emperor Palpatine, he's jumping around, he's doing backflips off the wall. Obviously, something an old man would not be able to do. He is once again tapping in that pool, in that Force power, and he's able to enhance his body in that way. So the difference that I saw between prequels in the original trilogy is that there is now an added component to it. Number one, Luke felt like just a regular village boy who walks into this larger world and he learns about the Force and he gives into it, and this is how he's able to fulfill his destiny. In the prequel trilogy, it's quite different. It is all focused around this Christ-like figure of Anakin Skywalker, right? He is the one. He is the one that the Force willed into existence. He has a huge midichlorian count, and everything rests on his decisions. Which route will he choose? Will he be a good person, or will he become evil? And obviously, he chose to be evil, and he threw the galaxy into upheaval and 20-plus year galactic civil war. So it's quite interesting, quite different, and obviously George Lucas incorporated a lot of Judeo-Christian kind of ideas into it. There's kind of patriarch-like, fatherly-like presence. That's what the Force is, and it dictates what one person must do. And unfortunately, Anakin Skywalker was not able to hear that call, right? He wasn't faithful enough, or he was too angry, he was too traumatized to follow the path, and he became evil. Now let's take a look at the sequel trilogy, which I think will be quite fun, guys. So, original trilogy, Force is just this quiet pool, this hidden knowledge. That's something you tap into, and you could either use it for good or for evil. Prequels kind of made a great distinction that there's not just this power out there, that this also resides in this one powerful being that could choose the outcome of the galaxy. With the sequel trilogy, I felt that Rey's quote summarizes basically what this whole trilogy is going to be about. But I also have to say this, that the sequel trilogy ideas of the Force were informed a lot by the way that J.J. Abrams filmed The Force Awakens. And I'm specifically referring to his very fast-paced filmmaking, right? A lot of fans talk about how The Force Awakens doesn't give you a lot of room to breathe. It moves from place to place, from action scene to action scene, very fast. And I think the same could be said about The Rise of Skywalker. It's very fast paced. And it almost felt to me that J.J. Abrams was addressing the audience and he said, well, you guys know what the Star Wars is, right? You know what the Jedi are or who the Sith are, what the Force is. I'm going to amp it up a little bit. I'm going to go faster. I'm going to trust you guys that you understand these concepts, these ideas, and we're just going to jump you right into the fun part quicker, which obviously backfired. A lot of fans didn't like it. They thought that Rey is kind of Mary Sue character who attains powers too fast. I'm not here to discuss that. I just want to discuss how I viewed the Force based on what the sequels were showing us. And to read the quote that Rey says in one of the trailers, right, in one of the sequences in the films, she says that something inside me has always been there, but now it's awake. And I'm afraid. I don't know what it is or what to do with it, and I need help. I think that's a really interesting and compelling idea that she is like Anakin, right? She's obviously clearly very, very powerful, and she's aware of this power, but then once again, she needs guidance. She needs to understand what it is. It's not up to her to decide where the galaxy is going to turn. She needs Luke Skywalker's help. At one point, she tries to turn to Ben. She says, like, I need help. Will you help me understand? She turns to Maz Kanata. She is a person who always seeks to go outside of herself. She doesn't see that all of this potential is inside her. She needs to understand who her parents are. She goes to the dark cave and all of these explanations. But we understand that at this point in the Star Wars storytelling, after a huge slumber, the Force rises to the surface to a boiling point, right? And it manifests through Ben Skywalker, and he becomes evil. He becomes the villain because he needs to represent one side of the whole. You cannot have light without the darkness. So you must have Kylo Ren. Boom, you have your villain. And obviously, the Force Awakens, right? The goodness of the universe, it needs to counterbalance that side of the evil. And so we have both parts, the yin and the yang. We have the villain, and we need to have a great hero. And because J.J. Abrams decided to jump right into it, I guess the way that I could interpret the Force is that sometimes it doesn't need to explain itself. Sometimes it doesn't need to announce itself to the person. It simply manifests because that's how things must be. This is the nature of all things, the duality of reality, right? You got to have day and night. You got to have hot and cold. And to every villainous person that comes out there, let's say for argument's sake, it took Kylo Ren longer to get there because he was under Luke Skywalker's tutelage, and then, he was training to be a Jedi Knight, and then became evil. And because he's evil, and because there's no other Jedi to train any other Padawan, the Force must decide to act on its own and says, well, boom, we're going to have this young person, this young woman, and the Force is going to explode in her. Once again, when we see her in The Force Awakens at the end of it, she is able to hold off her own without a lightsaber. She's quite capable. She fights the two assailants with a pole, but later on, when the Force awakens in her and she has a lightsaber, she's able to kind of like pick up the ropes pretty fast. At one point, she even closes her eyes with Kylo Ren, and she says, oh, that's it. Everything that I need is already there. So once again, I felt like in a way, it's returned to form with the original trilogy. It's Luke needing to kind of go through a very trying experience and look into himself and to understand, oh, wow, the Force is inside me. That's it. I must act. Same happens with Rey. But whereas Yoda was there for Luke's apprenticeship and he was there to explain it to Luke, for Rey, there was no other person, at least as far as The Force Awakens goes. So her own actions led her to that point where she kind of like realizes, wow, there's this great power. And of course, in The Last Jedi, we see the Luke Skywalker return, right? We're sort of back to basics in a way, because he tells Rey that, look, the Force is not just this tool that the Jedi can use at any whim. It doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to Sith. It doesn't belong to Jedi. It is always there. And what you must do is try to understand it, to give yourself to the Force and see it all around you. And he also explains to her the whole ideas of the Jedi hubris. And I love that part, guys. I love the fact that Rian Johnson brought the ideas, the concepts of the Force from the prequels into the sequel trilogy. And basically, Lucas addressing everything that the Jedi were doing and how they didn't see the potential in Anakin and they shunned him. And they said, well, you know, even Mace Windu, how he always looked at Anakin Skywalker and he said, you're not strong enough. You're not capable enough. You know, if you will, you'll earn my trust only if you do as I say. So they basically discarded him. And there was indeed a lot of hubris in the Jedi. It felt like they were led astray. They were using the Force in a utilitarian way. They were basically exploiting it and believing there's some kind of this elite caste that they should have all monopoly in the Force. There can't be any Sith. There can be only light, and we're the only ones who hold it. And we basically, what we do is we take all the children from their families, we rip them away, we bring them to Jedi temples, and we instruct them in the ways of the Force. It's very dogmatic. It reeks of like religious zealousy. And Luke addresses that in the sequels. He says that's not what the Force is. Sense it around you. And I love that montage when Rey senses the life and the death, the hot and the cold. It's so beautiful. Once again, that idea of yin and yang. And I loved the scene in the dark cave where it's such an interesting moment of that a lot of fans can interpret based on what you want to see in that scene, where she sees that black surface in the wall, right? And she sees reflections of herself, and she makes a move, and there was ripples to every move that she makes. Basically, to me, it was saying that once again, the Force is this pool that it's only arm's reach away, and it's all based on how you're going to act. What are you going to do? You can go and be a good person. You can go and be an evil person. It's not about Jedi or Sith. It's basically these two acolytes of the Force assigning themselves different names and spilling it over like with ritual and having like different garments or different colored lightsabers and so forth. Especially when you look at older Star Wars comics like Tales of the Jedi, you see basically the Sith as this cult. It's arguably what you see of the Jedi in the all 9 Star Wars films. It is also in a way a cult. It kind of like dresses themselves up in a very specific way, and they say we understand the Force. Where in the Last Jedi, it goes a completely different route. And I really enjoyed Rey's little moment in the cave. And of course, in The Rise of the Skywalker and throughout the new sequel trilogy, we see also a lot of different abilities, right? We see the Force Skyping, which I enjoyed a lot. We see that Rey is able to communicate with Kylo, with Ben, through the Force. So they're able to kind of sense each other and even touch hands at one point, right? That was really, really interesting without much explanation. I think this is where the Force works best, when it's not fully explained. It was like, hold on a second, how does this work? Well, it's the Force. It's greater than all of our minds combined, and it's beyond our grasp or reach. It's something that we can feel, but not something that we can explain. There's Force healing there, which I actually enjoyed. Again, if you subscribe to the idea that basically the sequel trilogy represents the Force as the Dragon Ball Z power, it has to go overboard. It has to spill over because there's no more waiting anymore. You know, right? The darkness is there, and the light has to arise and equally match it in order to restore balance in the galaxy. And I really liked the Luke's Force walk, right? When he walks from his planet on Acto and he appears before Kylo Ren in the First Order and he's meditating there. It was such an awesome display of power that is, once again, not fully explained, but it's also not a cheap trick because it takes a toll on Luke Skywalker. And he once again has to sacrifice his life, just like he did in Return of the Jedi. Even though he doesn't end up dead, right, because his father saves him, he sacrifices his life, and it takes a toll on him. And same here. He also projects himself, and that projection takes a toll on his body, and at the end of it, he has to sacrifice his life. So it's a good trade-off. His friends survive. He has to go, so I really enjoyed it a lot. And Yoda's interaction with the physical world, right? A lot of fans say, well, it's blasphemy. How come, they're able to do this now? Never before. Well, We see Obi-Wan Kenobi sit his ass down in Dagobah, right? When he talks to Luke, first of all, he's wearing robes, and these robes are not falling to his body. And then he sits down on a piece of wood, right? And he's talking to Luke. That's kind of interaction with the physical world around you. And that's what Yoda does. He actually like knocks Luke in the head with his cane, and he torches the Jedi tree, right? When Luke says, "Oh, the Jedi text, the sacred text," and Yoda just burns the tree. It was very, very interesting because once again, we see this magical, mysterious force that is part of our physical world, yet we're not meant to fully understand it. And of course, the final battle with the Emperor Palpatine, which, again, I wasn't a huge fan of his presence there, but let's roll with it, right? We're just trying to understand what the Force is there. I guess it was fitting because we've seen all the lightsaber duels in the world up until this time, right? We saw good guys fight the bad guys. What else can you do? So if you take the notion that the Force is this rising wave in this trilogy, how else are you going to conduct your final battle other than the Force, right? The Luke says, all of the Jedi live inside you, and the Emperor Palpatine has all the Sith. And it's basically two torrents of the Force, two sides of the Force. And once again, I didn't see it as evil Force versus good Force. It's yet again one and the same pool, one and the same source. Only Rey is channeling it out of selfless motivation, and the Emperor Palpatine wants to dominate the galaxy. And the basic clash of forces there. And at this time around, of course, the good needs to prevail. It's an age-old tale, a folklore tale of basically the good prevailing over evil. Now, of course, X amount of years later, we're going to have another trilogy. Rest assured, guys, I'm pretty sure we're going to see episodes, 10, 11, and 12, maybe with Rey, maybe not, who knows. But once again, where there is light, darkness has to arise. So to summarize all three trilogies, they're quite interesting in their own unique ways, right? The prequel trilogy took kind of like a religious Christian ideas of a holy person, of a young man in whose hands basically rests the destiny of the entire galaxy. Pretty interesting. And basically, his tragic fall led to a devastating war that lasted over 20 years. But it was his offspring, his son, who once again went to the Force, and he understood it in his own way. But because he was good at heart, he restored the balance. In the original trilogy, the Force is basically this magic that is indiscriminate. It doesn't care whether you're a good person or you're a bad person. If you choose to use it, you can become evil, but you rest assured there will be another person who rises up in power and will be equally an opposite to yourself, which we got Luke Skywalker. And in the sequel trilogy, basically it was cinematically, it went like rapid gun. It went too fast. They tried to do everything quickly and just introduce the fans. Look, the Force, it's everywhere. It's Rey arises to it very quickly, and there's Kylo Ren. So I guess if you're fans of Dragon Ball Z, I guess if you're fans of anime where heroes just go completely crazy, off the wall, and demonstrate these great powers, I think sequel trilogy has merit, and it's interesting in its own right. But you have to kind of go with the idea and say, okay, all right, the Force is trying to do, the filmmakers are trying to do what wasn't done before. Where before, it took time, and the heroes had a lot of trials, they were trying to understand it. Here, things are happening quickly because there is no more Jedi Order, there are no more Sith Order in the traditional sense. There's just one young tormented soul of Kylo Ren, and he's there, and he's basically channeling all of that hurt, all of that pain. And there must be balance in a galaxy. This is why Rey must rise to the occasion. And even without her understanding it fully, she must jump at the river and learn how to swim on the go. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this breakdown. Please let me know in the comment sections below, which out of the 9 films, which one of the trilogies represents the ideas about the Force which are closest to you, based on your culture, based on your ideas about the world, or basically based on other media that you watch. I'm pretty sure a lot of us fans, right, we like to go outside of Star Wars. We like to watch a lot of like Battlestar Galactica and Star Trek or fantasy shows and anime. Let me know which ideas you can correlate to other stuff that you enjoyed a lot. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I appreciate all of your kind comments. Please subscribe to my channel if you enjoy this podcast, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.